John. Bienvenue, welcome once again to another Cladding Matters. As ever, we have two stalwarts of the show, Hamish McClay, our Lord Master, helped me set this thing up in the first place, of Search and Convey, and Steve Day of the buildingsafetyscheme.org. But we are honoured and rather pleased to have with us as an extra wheel, as it were, John Lytton, the Earl of Lytton, with whom Steve has been constructing, authoring and creating a rather marvellous set of improvements or reshaping of the building safety schemes as it stands now, which is frankly direly needed. But to start us off, as is traditional on this show, Hamish.
Well, indeed, a great welcome to John here, the 7th Earl of Lytton, for those of you who aren't familiar with that. I just mentioned briefly, we're fortunate in this country to have two chambers within our organisation to actually sort of look after us within sort of Parliament. And the first one, they are the ones who initiate various bills, various laws and all the rest of it. The fortunate aspect, as mentioned, is the fact we have a second chamber, the House of Lords. And from the House of Lords, there are many experienced people who perhaps have more experience along certain dynamics, certain areas, compared to those within the House of Commons, many of whom can be transient in the extent that they're voted in, they're voted out. We've seen a massive change, and large number of MPs left just over 12 months ago. A lot of brand new ones came in, and therefore they're picking up, they're trying to understand things. Now, for a long time now, the Earl of Lytton, through his work that he's doing in the House of Lords, has been working very, very hard for the people out there who found themselves, through no fault of their own. Interesting aspect, isn't it? We have this, and it is important because progress is only made by actually change. And we've just changed just recently within what Parliament are actually sort of doing. They're wanting to remove this particular sort of issue that there's no fault eviction. Now, on the other side of things, we've got this no fault of the residents who have bought into a property without the understanding of the pure depth of the absence of safety within that building. And what John has been doing, he's been working very, very hard to actually compensate for, if you like, the challenges which came about. An attempt at progress, it was brought in the Building Safety Act. However, there were so many aspects which has actually sort of caused a significant impact of a derogatory kind rather than helping the scheme along. And therefore, something has to be done to remedy that. So congratulations for the hard work that John's been doing. Steve's been supporting him in much of his work as well. But it's a great privilege to have John here. And I think we've spent a lot of time speaking about the challenging position that people have found themselves in. And it's so good to be able to welcome John along to explain what he's actually doing, what he's working on to make the lives of those who found themselves in those very difficult situations very much better.
John, a warm welcome to you, and forgive me if it feels like you're in the hot seat, but we've been so keen to have you on the show to explain some of the good works that you're doing here and really what its inception is, what its goals are, and where you are in the process.
Well, first of all, thank you, Hamish and Gareth, very much for inviting me on today. It's a great privilege, and I think this is certainly the first occasion I've been on your Cladding Matters broadcast. Yes, I'm a practicing chartered surveyor, among other things, so I do have an understanding of the background to building regulations and that sort of thing. And I think Hamish said I was the 7th Earl. I'm actually the 5th Earl. I haven't been that many, but I won't pull them up short on that, because it's an easy one to get wrong in these morphing of titles over time. So my involvement in this goes back a very long way, and obviously as the Building Act of 1984 was really where the Thatcher government started deregulating a lot of this, and it was on the basis that the construction industry, the house builders in particular, were able to self-regulate, and that they were fit and proper people to do so. As we now know that if you set up a situation where there is self-regulation and that there is, to that extent, individual responsibility, but there is an absence of general oversight, and more particularly an absence of effective sanctions and repercussions for not getting it right, then human nature and the profits element in commerce tells you that things are likely to go wrong. And of course, what has happened is that not only have the constructors not in all not effectively adhered to the building regulations that were set in time, but with the removal of local authority building control and the absence and the advent of the approved inspector regime, it's got to the stage where they were actually able to mark their own homework, and that's been evident from the Grenfell inquiry. And it appalls me that there was such loss of life, and it appalls me that the lessons of the earlier fire at Lakanal House in Southwark were clearly not learned, and that when the coroner submitted his report to the department appears to have done nothing, and indeed had no system, as it transpires, for following it up. So we are making the same mistakes over and over again. Now, from my point of view, this has awful consequences for individual homeowners, and that's what we're talking about. People in what should be the safe refuge of their own home, the place where they've probably made the largest single investment financially, certainly the biggest investment they've made emotionally, other than marriage or partnership or a family and this sort of thing. But it absolutely goes to the core of those functions, and that's why when things aren't right and the effects of those are not something that the government has seen fit to step in and protect individual householders from, it has massive repercussions across the social and economic sector. And that's what drives me in all this, and that's what has driven me in the question of building safety. And as Steve knows, because we, I think, first got involved with the thing during the parts of the fire safety bill. I think it goes back that far. And then we were really invested with this in the building sector because we could see where it was going. This is not something, I think, for the faint-hearted when you look at the overall scale of things, because what is happening is that the last government, and so far no particular change with the present government, saw fit to allow the risks and the ultimate downside financially and emotionally to be visited on innocent homeowners, and let the developers and the house builders off, I think, relatively lightly. Now, there was a rationale for that in the sense it didn't want to stall house building, and no doubt they said they were the only people that can deliver that. But however you carve up this cake, the economic downside, and I don't want to concentrate on the economic downside too much, except that it is actually a cipher for the emotional downside as well, because all those are tied together. that has not been that has not been fully costed, and we know it hasn't been fully costed because we actually don't know quite how many buildings are affected. We do know that large numbers of them, and particularly if you're looking at the 11-meter height and below, get no protection under the Building Safety Act provisions. So this is as far as I'm concerned, an economic and social evil, and I think I would put it in those terms, that still needs to be addressed, because it is not going to go away just because you say a certain sector is not going to be held fully responsible. So with Steve, I tried to get amendments through to the Building Safety Act, which weren't, unfortunately, weren't successful. But that hasn't stopped me trying at every possible moment to keep raising the situation, often in private correspondence with ministers, often in what I'm saying to other peers, rather than necessarily in open debate. So I'll just leave it there. That's probably a long enough introduction.
Yes. John, I've just got a couple of silly questions to throw at you. It seems to me the old adage, if you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results, that's the first sign of madness. And it's been many occasions where, how should I put it, people have been allowed to mark their own homework over the last few years, not just simply in this scheme. It's obvious to all these are questions rather than statements. It may sound that way. It seems obvious to me, and this is a question, that if you allow marking of your own homework, that is no regulation at all. That's a complete laissez-faire attitude. Just let it hang. And on top of that, if you've got no teeth to back it up with, what's the point in checking it in the first place?
Well, I would agree with all of that, but I think what you're really saying is the point that's long ago occurred to me, is if you're departing from a rules-based system, what does that mean in terms of transactional analysis? What does that mean in terms of people's confidence and willingness to engage? And when you're talking about engage in terms of householders, it's often the largest single financial investment they will make in their lives. And it's a particular problem because the market in flats, what in technical terms are referred to as multi-occupancy buildings, is a very important first step for many on the housing ladder. It's where people need to be because they need to work in usually higher density urban environments. It's a place where there are goods and services, there are jobs to be had, there's public transport, so you don't necessarily need a car. And also it's very important for downsizers. So it's actually an extremely important sector of the market. And there are, I think the last statistic I saw was 4.8 million leasehold properties. That's about, I think, is about 20% of the total housing stock. So if that starts to be affected, and as I see it, that is now a big question that people are asking: can we really trust this? Can we really trust what's been, how things have been put together in these complex multi-occupancy buildings? That's a really big deal in terms of national economics. So beyond the individual, beyond the awful effects on households, and wrecked families, wrecked finances, having to take children out of their schools, and so on and so forth, all the things that people have written to me about over the years, there is this big question of the economic competence that sits behind the decision making so far on who is responsible for sorting it out, and should it be sorted out. My argument is it has to be sorted out.
But also I mean, the whole crux of all this, and before I pass on to Steve, I'm milking this, John, because it's such a wonderful thing to have you here, so forgive me for throwing questions at you. It just seems to me that, and we've discussed it a number of times, guys, on Cladding Matters, flats, apartments of this nature, are often the first step on the buying ladder for anyone. There is a complete lack of availability of domiciles anyway. And because tens of thousands, apparently, according to figures that Steve's given me, of these are now in a stasis pattern. They can't move on. They can't sell them. They can't rent them. They can't even barely insure them. And they've got massive ground rents. So they're an onerous proposition at best. They can't be moved on, which means that portion of the marketplace is not quite ground to a complete stop, but it's not far off. And it means the consequential loss from all of this nonsense is, how should I put it? It's ridiculous. I mean,
well, I wish you could dismiss it by a word as mild as ridiculous. As far as I'm concerned, this is for many households, this is simply not a joking matter. This is a existential risk in terms of their family structure and its cohesion and what they do, and it's a failure of, I think, a promise. And if you like, a sort of social contract between government and homeowners about protecting their asset. Now, I know there's always a business about the value of your asset can go up or down or whatever.
Of course.
And that's all very well if you're investing in something like the stock market. But the participation of willing owners willing to take out a mortgage or put money into bricks and mortar is pretty fundamental to our national economy. If you look at the amount that we have invested in total in residential real estate, it's an eye-watering amount, and we're I can't remember number 6 or 7 in the G20 or whatever it is in terms of our level of indebtedness. I wouldn't want to be quoted, as it were, on that particular statistic, but we're very high up in terms of our level of debt secured against property, and in this case residential property in particular. If that stalls, then it's a big deal. And my understanding of the statistics is that in most instances there has been an increase in value of flats since 2017, taking a general average, which is less than the rate of inflation generally. So they're actually nursing a loss, and it's substantially below even the inflation adjusted figures for other types of housing. So this is going to raise the question as to, well, what is housing for? Is it something where people are going to gain equity, or is it just a down payment instead of paying a rent to under the in the private rented sector or in the social rented sector that people are being encouraged to engage in? And if you have this promise of a property owning democracy, and you think that ownership of homes is a good thing politically, then I have to say I think some serious damage has been done along the way here, and that we are now seeing the effect of that compounded by the still high costs of borrowing and the ever higher amount of deposits that have got to be put up by people wanting to buy homes, and this increasing seemingly disparity between average earnings and average house prices as an indication of affordability of all sorts.
I mean, John, just for context, when I bought my first house, I was able to do so on 3 times my income, and my income wasn't stellar at that stage. But now, my income's much larger now. I couldn't possibly afford to buy a house on those metrics. It's crazy. I'm going to pass straight over to Steve. Welcome once again, Steve. Great that we got John here. Your position is not unique, but it is so troublesome, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, we're as John well knows, we're a victim at Royal Artillery Keys of the watered down remediation standard, PAS 9980. So they've they've allowed Barratt, which have started work now. We're about 5 stories up with our scaffolding, so they'll be taking over my 8th floor flat shortly.
Does that mean you'll be penned in?
Yeah. But after all of that, we will have fire shafts remaining with Euroclass E XPS panels, which is the second most highly combustible material that the Euroclass rating rates. And that gives us obviously risks of high insurance and questions over our safety, because it's the single escape stair of a 16-story tower, and there's 8 of them. And, you know, that's a lot of risk that they're... And I've had 2 fire engineers, and I'm trying to get one to go public. And we got the BBC here, so maybe we may do it. They'll enjoy that, Barratt. And we'll publicise what they really think about it. And both fire engineers have said that under their advice, they would not advise these materials be retained if they were themselves completing a fire risk assessment of the external walls under PAS for these buildings. So there's no, you know, it's highly subjective, the standard, which the standard itself admits, and can't be used where you have a zero risk to, you know, to defects. And so PAS needs to be reformed. And so I'm put forward an amendment in the Liberal Democrat conference this weekend. I still don't know if it's going to be selected. There's a little bit of a process going on at the moment, but what it does is it says, well, we've got a definition of building safety risk under the Building Safety Act 2022, and we want to use that instead of this PAS standard. And because the definition of building safety risk is any risk which could be argued to cause a risk of fire spread, that would be catching these building regulation breaches of current regulations. And we think the panels, and I've had some advice on it, the panels won't be on. So you've got 2 tiers of remediation. You've got the one, this watered down PAS, which is used unfortunately for the majority of remediations, where you have public funded remediations under the Building Safety Act, and also where you have the developer contracts, where the top 52 have said they'll fix the building for the last 50 years, but only under the watered down standard. And then if you're brave enough, you can go to court and get a gold-plated remediation, where you do get the better standard under the Building Safety Act. So we want to say, no, that needs to not just be for those fortunate enough to go for a remediation order in the courts. That should be for everyone. Why are we having a 2-tier system here? That will help us at Royal Artillery Quays, and it will help millions. So that's one thing. And then what I'm planning to do in our building safety campaign is to work with the Earl of Lytton that we have here, other MPs and peers, to try and form a coalition, because we've always tried to form a coalition, and we've I don't think the problem's going away. And I think the other tragedy, we've got the watered down standard. The other tragedy is 1.7 million people have been excluded from all protection. That's from the National Residential Landlords Association figures. That doesn't mean they all have defects, but it means if they do, they're fully liable. And that's your buildings under 11 meters. That's your owners that have more than 3 flats. So they're seen as buy-to-let investors, and your enfranchised. And the enfranchised one's very interesting, because the government is piping on about how good common hold is, and maybe we can have another discussion on this leasehold reform and that. But it's also been a bit of a distraction, because we've always separated building safety and leasehold reform as separate. Other campaign groups haven't done that and have tried to conflate, and that's always been a little bit of a problem. They kind of tried to...
We've just had a comment from long-time viewer and attendee and friend of the show, Zara Olibukas, who has said there's too many dangers on the conveyancing front too of buying flats, frankly.
Yes, absolutely. Conveyancers have been compromised, because they have to make a decision. How much liability is this buyer going to take on? And what we've been doing with our amendments in the Lords, that the Earl of Lytton's very kindly tabled for us, is we've put in this need for consumer protection outside of the court. So you, just like a car, you don't have to work out who's responsible, say, for the brakes that haven't been installed correctly. You just go to the manufacturer and they sort it. Well, that's what we really want to achieve, and that's the best way. Because that puts the liability, and we say it should go on the developer or the lead contractor, joint and severally. We accept that some will be out of business, So we have a wider construction industry levy than they have at the moment, levied at variable rates. So you can get the cladding manufacturers who've largely got away with it, levy that slightly higher than you might do other classes of industry. But also those temporary companies that they used, those SPVs that developers like to wrap up a company after development's done, we can get them with the parent company liability clauses that Daniel Greenberg very kindly drafted in for us. So we've got a lot of sophistication in it. And unfortunately, the governments, and I say governments, we're not being political, it's all colours of politics. They haven't yet wanted to implement it fully, and that's something that we will continue to campaign for.
But it's the reason why they haven't implemented fully, because frankly, it's I'm trying to think of a nice way of putting this. I'm going to struggle. It's a bit of a shed show, as it were.
It's too hot to handle.
Thank you, John. It's why would you want to start? It's like you're standing on the top of a ski jump and you just come to your senses that this thing is nearly a 1 in 2 drop and you're probably going to die at the other end. They're seeing that, they're looking down, they're thinking, nah. Well, and it leaves us all in the stuck.
Well, let me just, so one of the arguments that have come my way as I've been negotiating with the Liberal Democrats is, can they afford it? Well, I've done some research on the annual reports, and this will give you a taste. So Barratt Redrow are sitting on net assets as per the accounts of 2024 of 5,439,100,000 net assets, including land banks. And their operating profit in 25, that's quite recent, it's 595 million. And with a net cash that are sitting on, so as well as that 5 billion of net assets, they're sitting on 773 million.
If I can be a bit revolutionary, I've been told to keep it quiet for this week, but if I can be a bit revolutionary and say maybe they should sell up some of those bloody land assets.
Well, that's, and just to complete the point, so Taylor Wimpey, 4 billion of net assets, including land banks. Persimmon, 3.5 billion pounds of net assets. Bellway, 3.465 billion pounds of net assets.
So what you're saying is, theoretically, there's realizable liquid assets that could cover this issue without any great issue.
And so, and the other point I'll make is, so there is affordability. They can also take on debt, low capacity, and they can also, as you say, sell off some of those land banks. But the freeholders who aren't responsible for the defects in most cases, there are a few exceptions, they don't have all the money that the government are trying to claim. So they've put in their legislation, let the freeholders pay, and they've gone with the populist view that they've got loads of money. Well, listen to this. So Long Harbour, which is a big group of freeholder companies, and the populist view is that they want to take all the ground rent away from them, right? So it sounds popular. You don't have to pay your ground rent any more money for nothing. That's the populist view. But if you were to take away that ground rent, their net assets, including the ground rent, are 970 million, but their liabilities are 741 million. So if you take away the 970 million, they will go bust. And then it's the same for another load of freeholder groups, which we've gone through all their accounts. So just by following the populist view would mean the freeholder funded remediations under the Building Safety Act would then be destroyed. And therefore, without amendments, as in the Earl's consumer protection amendments, to find funding from the industry that caused the problem, cleaning it up as well, then leaseholders are in danger if they hit that freeholder funded backstop. If the ground rent abolition happens, which I don't think it will, because of ECHR and so on, but if it did, this could blow up the Building Safety Act, and it proves the need. But I think maybe if I go back to the Earl of Lytton, consumer protection is very much needed.
Well, yes.
That sounds a bit like can open worms everywhere. Go on, carry on, sir.
I think Steve has amply identified the the nature and the scale of the problem, and this whole question of tenure does sit as a separate issue, because if you transfer everything get rid of all the nasty freeholders and their equally nasty agents, no doubt, and this sort of thing, and then it's all vested in the a group of common holders or a resident-owned block in some shape or form, they inherit the problem of the defects in the building.
The problem just changes hands, doesn't it?
And we concentrated on fire safety defects and this sort of thing, but we know that there are other defects as well, and some of these are extraordinarily expensive to try and sort out. Now, the thing that worries me is what this means if you stand back and look at the overall landscape. And I said this in a meeting to the Lord's Minister a few months ago. I said, when you've just got rid of these players, the freeholder and the freeholder's agent from the thing, where do you think the pointer of risk is? And the pointer of risk is the longevity of the building. And if you look at what has been discussed in academic circles to do with things like condominiums and strata title in Australia and all sorts of other similar ways of trying to leverage in the private buyer as a means of financing this type of multi-occupancy development, you'll find exactly the same problems across the world. And indeed, one of the I think it's the Surfside building in Florida. You may recall there was a collapse there. And,
I remember.
And I can't remember. I think 90 people may have lost their lives in that. Some number of that sort.
Put it this way, so it was more than one person lost their life, and one
certainly
person too many.
a lot of people lost their lives, and I'm told there are something like 11,000 similar buildings all the way up and down the United States eastern seaboard, and all constructed around the same sort of time in the 60s, probably to a relatively cheap spec, all exposed to marine environments, and therefore the effects that has on concrete and reinforcing and this sort of thing. And very likely also suffering from the same issue of maintenance, essential maintenance being deferred because of cost. Now, this is a really toxic situation if one looks at it in terms of, well, what does that mean for higher density developments in on scarce urban plots of one sort or another, and it's not a good look, I have to say, because you then have to say, well, if you offer somebody the equivalent of forever hold, if I can call it that, as common hold, or it might be 990 yearlies, or it might be 250 yearlies, and the building is not going to last that long. So who is being told what? And I think we need to have a complete reset about how we look at this and how we encouraging private individuals to invest on some sort of perpetuity basis on something that's actually much shorter lived than that. Now, this isn't a popular subject to delve into, I can tell you, because it affects the whole actuarial approach to insurance and finance and also people's own investment choices. But I don't take the buying public for fools in all this. I think they instinctively know now that something isn't quite right, and that's why sales are flagging, the market is flagging, and that is going to be a very non-fictional factor that we've got to face up with in terms of our property owning democracy.
Certainly, we've discussed on a number of occasions, Hamish, that we've once you've taken the slightly shiny petticoats off, what are you left with underneath? And it turns out that might be far too inherently damaged to fix by anyone because there's just not enough money in the pot. Hamish, would you care to take us home? You're on mute, sir. There we go.
I did. I'm unmuted myself and muted myself again. And of course, one of my experiences in life was actually as a mathematics teacher. So there's no excuse whatsoever for accusing sort of John of being the seventh Earl. I do hope we can actually get him back on and speak as the fifth Earl.
Yes, John, you're most welcome. You'll be most welcome. Most welcome.
But it's sad we haven't been had the opportunity to actually go a little bit deeper into the good work that has been going on between John and Steve. And of course, Zara's actually had her input as well, who actually gave us some good words there. And I think we do know it's ongoing. And we give thanks, of course, not just to the people here. We've had some tremendous guests here to actually try and explain and help with the background. And Matt Hodges Long in particular, who he himself is keeping a register of those people who are actually forced out of their accommodation.
Yeah.
You're largely speaking about people who are inside, trapped inside, like Steve. But however, there are people, because of the dangers, and there's one just recently in Bristol, where a number of tenants they had to be forcibly removed almost. Basically, they had no time, and there they are out there. We're not speaking about the mental impact upon those. I mean, it is absolutely enormous, the pressures that are put upon people. And so I think we need to carry on speaking about the subject to make people aware of it, but also to create an awareness in people of the fantastic work that John is putting forward with his support in the House of Lords.
Can I say thank you before we sign off?
Of course we can, John.
And
please.
That's not only to say thank you to people like Zara and other professionals who have willingly shared their concerns and their ideas with me, but also the hundreds of people that have written to me over with in many cases tales of real personal tragedy, and I want to say to them, I'm not giving up yet by any means, because I think there's a very, very important issue at stake here, and it may well be that the movers and shakers won't be from within Parliament. It will be some situation that arises outside Parliament that will ultimately move things along. But I am certain in my own mind that, as I said at the beginning, this is not going to go away. Something needs to be done, and it needs to be done fairly urgently. And I just pay tribute to all those people who have suffered from, they've had to decamp, or they've had to sell off their property at a massive loss, or whatever. These are the people who keep me awake. It's their experiences that keep me awake at night, and I just want people to know that I'm still thinking of this particular problem and how we actually fix it.
And also, can I just say, we did a petition. Well, actually, I didn't do it. Jake did it. And we'll put a link on under the podcast. But there's 64,814 backers now of the Earl of Lytton's consumer protection legislation amendment. So that shows you just how many people are fighting, for their own futures, because they're in terrible states. And of course, we lost the late Amanda Walker, who was a great proponent of the scheme due to being one of the excluded. It's absolute personal tragedies all over the country, and lots of silent ones, lots of people struggling with their mental health. And the government's approach is to limit the liability on the construction industry. They've done what they can, and that's it. And then we better speed it all up. And that is unacceptable. And your great work, Hamish and Gareth, having this weekly podcast for over a year now, is not what they want, because they do not want this discussion.
Well, we shall continue to be a thorn in their sides until your great works are thrust firmly up their nostrils and they actually get on with it and make the relevant changes. Let me thank Hamish McClay of Searching Vey, our Lord and Master, who set this up with me in the first place. Of course, Steve Day of BuildingSafetyScheme.org. John Lytton, thank you, sir. The Earl of Lytton, the fifth Earl of Lytton, Hamish. And to all of you out there, thank you so much for your ongoing support. Try and remember to keep your feet on the ground, reach for the stars, but all the while please look after your mental health. Until next week, goodbye.
Bye.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish you the moon, but their word always fails. They'll tear down your wall.